The intercom in car 3 has been squawking for 11 minutes, and the man trapped inside it has stopped being polite about it. Hello? Is anybody there? I have a 6 a.m. flight. Hello? You key your radio without picking up your pace. 40 stories above the lobby, in a machine room the size of a walk-in closet, the drive sheave sits dead center of the shaft, brake pads worn down past the rivets. Somebody skipped a maintenance cycle 8 months ago. Not you. You just inherited the call. The building smells like fresh paint and money, marble lobby, a doorman in a wool coat, a chandelier that costs more than your row house. None of it means anything up here. Up here, it's just steel, grease, and a safety circuit doing its job better than the last mechanic did his. Behind the panel, the safety circuit is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Refusing to move a car with worn brakes, trapping one very expensive suit between the 31st and 32nd floors of a building where the penthouse sold for $4 million, and the elevator mechanic makes considerably less than that. You release the brake manually, walk the car down 6 inches at a time using the emergency lowering valve, and pop the doors at the 31st floor landing. The man steps out, adjusting his cuffs like the elevator insulted him personally. He doesn't thank you. He doesn't look at your name tag. He's already on his phone rebooking a car to the airport. That's fine. You weren't doing it for him. By the time you clock out that night, you'll have solved a problem worth more to that building's insurance company than most people make in a year. You'll drive home in a service van that isn't yours, park it at the Union Hall, and walk 2 blocks to a duplex with a bike chained to the porch rail. Nobody in that tower will ever wonder what's sitting in your brokerage account. Neither did you for a long time. 10 years earlier, you were 23, 6 weeks into an apprenticeship, carrying another mechanic's tools up stairwells because the freight elevator was the one being repaired. The pay was $17.40 an hour, which sounded like a lot until rent came out. $612 a month for half a 2-bedroom above a laundromat, split with a machinist named Thomas, who worked second shift and left notes on the fridge instead of talking to you most days. Your checking account lived somewhere between $40 and $300, and the low end usually landed around the 17th, right before payday, right when the fridge got quiet and dinner got creative. The senior mechanic training you that first year was a man named Gerald, 59 years old, 3 years from his pension, who inspected every job like the building owed him money personally. He didn't talk much. When he did, it usually came out sideways, aimed at the equipment instead of at you. One Tuesday, elbow deep in a governor rope inspection, he said it without looking up. Every shaft's got a counterweight roughly matched to the cab. You skip that balance. The motor's fighting the whole building every single trip, all day, every day, till it burns out early. He tightened a bolt. Most people's paychecks got no counterweight at all. Wonder why they're always tired. You didn't write it down. You didn't need to. It sat there. That Friday, on your lunch break in the machine room, you opened the union's supplemental retirement account on your phone and put in $75. Not because you had a plan, because $75 felt like a number you could survive losing, and not doing it felt worse than doing it. The next payday, you did it again. Then it became automatic, pulled before you ever saw the number and decided you needed it more than the version of you in 20 years did. 4 months in, a compressor fitting slipped while you were re-terminating a hoist cable and opened your palm to the bone. 6 stitches, an ER copay of $340 that 2 years earlier would have gone straight onto a card you were still paying off from a winter with a broken furnace. This time it came out of an account you'd built without noticing. $900 and some, sitting there from months of not doing much of anything. You paid it, drove home one-handed, and went back to work Monday with a bandage and nothing else to show for it. Nobody tells you at 23 that the version of you who pays a medical bill without panicking isn't braver than the version who panics. He just built a small wall 5 months earlier, $75 at a time, before he needed one. 2 years passed. Nothing happened. That's not me skipping ahead. That's the actual story. No lucky break, no inheritance, no tip that paid off. $75 became $110 when you got licensed and your rate jumped. The account quietly crossed 4 figures, then kept going in a way that felt like nothing because it was supposed to feel like nothing. That summer, a mechanic named Frankie was leaving the trade to move south and needed to unload an enclosed trailer and a dirt bike fast, priced to move, financing available through a buy here, pay here lot 2 blocks from the Union Hall. Half the apprentice class was already planning a riding trip. You went and looked at it on your lunch break. sat on the bike in Frankie's driveway, and did the math on a payment that would have eaten what you were putting away every 2 weeks. You told him you'd think about it. You didn't call back. Somebody else bought it a week later, and you spent that Saturday doing exactly nothing, which at the time felt like losing. That was also the year you started a small habit nobody suggested and nobody knew about. Every birthday, you'd check the account once, write the number on the back of a receipt or an index card, fold it into your wallet, and not look again until the next birthday. 24 was $1,100. 25 was $3,400. The cards piled up in a shoebox in your closet, each one a little embarrassing on its own, meaningless as a single data point, and completely undeniable as a stack. A coworker named Dutch, 51, 2 decades on the job, had a kid who just made an elite travel hockey program, the kind with a 4-figure roster fee before a single hotel got booked. Dutch worked every Saturday overtime shift he could find and still put ice time, gear, and tournament flights on 3 different cards. He wasn't reckless. He drove the same truck for 11 years and packed the same lunch as you. He just believed, the way a lot of good fathers believe, that this was the one bill worth going into debt for, because it might turn into a scholarship, and a scholarship might turn into a life his son wouldn't have had otherwise. You never said anything about it. It wasn't your business. And honestly, watching his kids' highlight videos in the break room, you understood exactly why he did it. When you finally got your mechanic's license and the pay bump that came with it, you let yourself buy one thing outright. A good pair of steel-toed boots, the kind that actually lasted, instead of the $18 pair you'd been resoling with shop tape. Nobody noticed. That was the point. The upgrade lived on your feet, not on your Instagram. At 26, your cousin Nico texted you about a pre-construction condo downtown, an assignment flip. Buy the paper on a unit before it's even built. Sell the contract before closing for a quick profit. Everybody at his gym was doing it. He sent screenshots of a guy 3 units over who'd already flipped his contract for an $18,000 profit without ever touching a mop or a mortgage. You looked at the listing for maybe 4 minutes on your phone during a slow ride up to a machine room and didn't call him back. Nico put down a deposit that week. He brought it up at every family gathering for the next several months, half bragging, half fishing for you to get in before the next building sold out. You told him you were good. He didn't push, but he definitely thought less of you for it, at least for a while. 5 months later, the building's completion date slipped 8 months, carrying costs ate through Nico's deposit, and the flip he'd bragged about at Thanksgiving quietly became a unit he couldn't sell and could barely afford to close on. He never brought it up again. Neither did you. At 28, the private sector came calling. A modernization contractor offered $71,000 a year, an $8,000 signing bonus, and a brand new equipped van with your name stenciled on the door. A real step up from union scale on paper. The recruiter took you to lunch and let the van sit in the parking lot, the whole meal like a third guest at the table. You sat with the offer letter for a week. Then you ran the actual numbers on the back of a work order. The union pension paid a guaranteed multiplier per year of service on top of the supplemental account you'd been feeding since you were 23. The private company offered a 401k with a token match that vested over 5 years you'd have to survive first, at a company that had already changed ownership twice in a decade. Stenciled van or not, one of those paths compounded whether the market cooperated or not, and the other one depended on the company still existing in 20 years. You turned it down. Nobody at the hall understood why you didn't take the van. By 29, your account crossed $100,000 while you were sitting on a folding chair in a rooftop machine room, eating a sandwich out of a cooler you'd owned since the apprenticeship. You checked the app out of habit, saw the number, and went back to eating. There was no one up there to tell, and no one down on the street who'd have believed it looking at you anyway. That same year, the market dropped hard for 6 straight weeks. Your balance went from just over $9,000, a separate, newer account you'd started investing more aggressively, down to around $7,100. Every account you owned turned red at the same time, and for the first time, the number on the app actually made your stomach drop instead of just registering as information. Dutch's brother-in-law, who'd started trading individual stocks off a phone app, sold everything at the bottom and moved the cash into a savings account, paying nothing. He told you at a cookout that summer he'd gotten out before it got worse, like it was a decision instead of a reaction. You didn't correct him. You didn't sell anything yourself. You didn't open the app for 10 days, because not looking took more discipline than looking would have. You kept the automatic contribution running the entire time, buying more shares for the same $75 than you'd bought 6 weeks earlier. By the time the account recovered 8 months later, it wasn't just back to 9,000. It had passed 14 because you never stopped buying while everything was on sale. Nobody warns you that fear and opportunity look identical from inside a falling account. By 31, you'd saved enough for a down payment on a narrow, tired row house 2 streets from the Union Hall, not because you'd made it, but because the math finally worked without stretching. The mortgage was smaller than your old rent had been. You did the closing on a Tuesday afternoon off work, still in your uniform shirt, and the title agent asked twice if you were sure you didn't want a bigger place while rates were where they were. You weren't sure of much in life, but you were sure of that. That year, your mother's property tax bill came due and then came due again, past the deadline, with a lien notice stapled to the second one. She hadn't told anyone, the same way she'd never told anyone about the roof leak 2 winters before that she'd patched herself with a tarp and a staple gun. You found out from your aunt, almost by accident, over a phone call about something else entirely. You wired $5,200 that afternoon without opening a calculator first, called your mother, and told her it was handled before she could finish apologizing. She cried for exactly 1 sentence, then asked if you'd eaten dinner yet, which was as close as she'd ever get to saying thank you. Thomas, your old roommate from the apartment above the laundromat, texted out of nowhere that winter. His car needed a water pump he couldn't cover until payday, $450. You sent $600 and told him to keep the rest. He paid back exactly 453 weeks later, like the extra 150 had never happened. Somewhere in there, you ran a number you'd never bothered running before. 4% of your total accounts, the rough amount they could responsibly generate in a year without touching what was underneath. It landed almost exactly on your new mortgage payment. On paper, the money you'd built without telling anyone could now cover the roof over your head, whether you worked another day or not. You didn't say it out loud to anyone at first. You just sat at the kitchen table with the number written on the back of one of your birthday index cards next to the mortgage statement, staring at how close they landed. It wasn't freedom yet. It was proof the plan had a floor under it, which turned out to matter more than the number itself. You didn't quit. You went in the next morning, took a call about a stuck freight elevator in a warehouse, and ate lunch on the same folding chair. But something had shifted underneath the routine. A quiet arithmetic running in the background of every decision that hadn't been there before. This is usually the part where a video like this asks for a subscribe. Might as well do it here, in the boring middle, since the boring middle is the entire point of this channel. At 33, Dutch's son didn't get the scholarship. He made a good junior team, played 2 solid seasons, and then, like almost everyone in that pipeline, aged out without a Division I offer. There was a stretch that spring when Dutch stopped bringing lunch and started buying the cheapest thing in the vending machine instead. And you noticed, the way you notice things about people you've worked beside for a decade. You thought about offering to help. You had the number sitting there, and it would have cost you nothing you'd miss. But you also knew Dutch. Knew he'd rather work a Sunday double than take a loan from a guy 9 years younger who still packed a lunch and rode a bike to the hall. So you didn't offer. You just started leaving your extra granola bars in his locker without saying anything about it, and neither of you ever mentioned it. Dutch never said a word of regret about the hockey money in the break room. He just started talking about retirement math for the first time in 11 years, doing at 54 what you'd started at 23, and you didn't say anything about that either. He wasn't a cautionary tale. He made a different set of trades, for reasons that made sense to him, and he was living inside the ones he'd made, same as you were living inside yours. There's a specific kind of quiet that comes with a number like the one sitting in your accounts now. You can't mention it at a cookout. You can't compare notes with a coworker 3 overtime shifts from a car payment. It isn't a competition, and it never was. But it does put a small, permanent distance between you and rooms full of people you genuinely like. Mara found out by accident, not on purpose. You'd been together a while by then, splitting the electric bill down to the exact dollar the way you split everything, and she'd offered to help you sort tax documents at the kitchen table one February because you kept putting it off. She wasn't looking for anything. She just opened the wrong folder on the laptop, saw a brokerage statement with a number on it that didn't match the guy who rode a 15-year-old bike and complained about the price of eggs, and went quiet for a second too long. Why do we split the electric bill down to the penny? She finally asked. If this is sitting right here? You didn't have a clean answer, so you gave her the honest one instead. Splitting it down to the penny was never about the money. It was about staying a person who still noticed what things cost, because the day you stopped noticing was the day all of this stopped working. She sat with that for a while, then closed the folder herself, without asking to see the total again. She never brought it up at a dinner with her sisters, never mentioned it to your mother, never once made you feel like the number changed who she thought you were. It just became one more thing that was true about you, that almost nobody else knew. That's the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. The quiet isn't loneliness, exactly. It's closer to a small, specific kind of trust, deciding who gets to know, and living comfortably with everyone else simply guessing wrong. Which brings you back to car 3, 40 floors up, brake pads down to the rivets, a man in an expensive suit who never learned your name. Behind you on the platform, a new apprentice named Priya is watching you work the emergency lowering valve, the same way you once watched Gerald, 6 weeks into a job that pays just enough to make the 17th of the month feel tight. You don't give a speech. You just say it the way it was said to you, aimed at the equipment instead of at her. Counterweight's gotta roughly match the cab, you tell her, tightening a bolt. Skip that, and you're fighting the whole building forever. You nod toward the shaft. Most paychecks don't have one. That's the whole trick, building one before anybody tells you to. She doesn't write it down. She doesn't need to. She'll spend the next few years thinking she forgot it, the same way you did, right up until the year she doesn't. You finish the call, ride the freight elevator back down alone, and walk out into a parking lot where nothing about your car, your jacket, or your lunch cooler would tell a stranger anything true about the number attached to your name. Somewhere in a shoebox at home, a stack of index cards tracks the whole climb in your own handwriting, birthday by birthday, and not one of them was ever meant for anyone else to read. That was never an accident. That was the whole design. If this made you rethink what quiet wealth actually looks like, hit subscribe. There's another one of these every week, and tell me in the comments. What's the one purchase everyone around you assumes you'd make that you've quietly never bought?